American cinema is the best.
The best? That is like the most blasphemous thing I've ever heard. 'Cause what do we have besides superhero shit, remakes, and sequels to old movies nobody asked for?
This is true about sequels. If something is good,
Why ruin it?
So Coming to America 2 or Coming to America, it's one of those movies that's just it's doing too much. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's never great. One of the things the movie did bad was just unnecessary musical acts. Like, why is Teyanna Taylor singing her song when she's being presented to the prince? And why does the prince perform with her? Why is En Vogue, Salt and Pepper, and Gladys Knight at the funeral?
What's even the point? There's not even a point.
So first, it's a sequel, so we have to talk about that. Second, there's this whole theme about like duty to the crown and traditions. Then there's like this other theme of Black masculinity. And then you have all of these dark-skinned female characters who play probably every single trope there ever was created for a dark-skinned female. And then just a little splash of colorism. So first, let's talk about the fact that it's a sequel. So usually when you do a sequel, it's like, you know, within a decade. It's been 3 decades and they decided to do a sequel. Usually when sequels fail, it's because they tried to redo the first one, but they didn't do it better or they didn't add anything to it to make it worthwhile. And then it just becomes like, why did you even bother? Like, why did you waste your time, make me waste my time for this? So I know in the first movie, Eddie Murphy wanted to like make commentary on dating as a celebrity. So his character Akeem was given a wife that was groomed to be the wife of a king. And so she didn't love him for who he was. She loved him for what he was. So what he's trying to say about dating as a celebrity is that you never know if that person's there for you or there for the fame. So that was not the commentary that he was trying to bring to Coming to America 2. Instead, I feel like they tried to use this movie to comment on every single issue that Black people are facing today. Every single one. And they also went overboard in trying to like bring in stuff from the first movie to the second movie. Like sometimes it worked and sometimes it was just nonsensical and unnecessary. You have the pedal throwers, you have the royal bathers, you had the scene with the taxi, you had the scene with the pastor who's also kind of vulgar. You had the singing scene with Ray Watson in Sexual Chocolate. They redid the scene of the king walking with Akeem and then Akeem walking with his son. They even brought back the twins that they met in the club who were rapping. They brought them to the wedding in Zamunda in the second movie. And that was the one where I was like, this is literally so unnecessary. Why are they here? And I also remember that in the first movie, Akeem used the stick from the mob to fight off the burglar. And that was also the turning point in the plot where Lisa changed her affections from the slow glow guy to Akeem. And in the second movie, it's the daughters who are trained in the stick fighting, and then them, along with Semi, use the sticks to fight off General Easy. And that's like the turning point in the plot where the oldest daughter is like proven to be the rightful monarch for Zamunda. So next I want to talk about Black masculinity in this movie. There's a lot of preconceived ideas that get placed onto Black men in this society. For example, they're dangerous or violent, like the association of them being gangbangers. The whole idea of them being like absentee fathers, deadbeat dads, they're not around, they're lazy, they didn't work hard. And a lot of times there's no consideration given to why Black men are perceived like this. So right off the bat, when we meet Lavelle, who's Akeem's bastard son, we learn that it's his 30th birthday. He no longer wants to live hand to mouth, like he wants to find a job that's solid and will give him like a proper future. Next, it goes into this scene where Lavelle's doing an interview with this rich white trust fund kid. And the kid's like, don't call me Mr. Duke, that's my dad, that's my grandfather. Like, they started this company and like now I'm just here like continuing the legacy. So he's privileged. Then he goes on to ask Lavelle these really personal questions that check every single box of Black men's stereotypes.
Did it say that you didn't graduate college?
Well, yeah, see, I was 3 credits short from getting my business degree, but then my mom got laid off. And, you know, I had to drop out to help with the rent.
Is she addicted to drugs or?
What?
Does she have gambling issues or?
No, man.
Pop's in the picture or?
My dad was not in the picture.
When like you, the viewer, are watching, you're like, no, like his dad's a king. Like this isn't relevant to him. Like this is all a mix up. So it's like a perfect scene of just showing how like the white perception of Black men is like forced on Black men, whether it fits their situation or not. But then what's interesting is that after Lavelle meets Akeem and Akeem goes back to his place, tells his family he's taking him to Zamunda, and then him and his mom go to Zamunda, like Lavelle is literally placed in the exact same situation as that white guy that was doing his interview. Like that white guy, his father and his grandfather started that company and put him in that spot to be interviewing Lavelle. And now Akeem and King Jofer are literally putting him in this position of power that he did nothing to deserve other than being the firstborn. So I really like how they handle this character development for the rest of the movie, because when Lavelle gets to Zamunda, he's given the freedom to live up to his fullest potential. And if he's as resourceful and smart as he says he is, then he'll be able to pass all the tests and become the crown prince of Zamunda and marry his queen. But you also see him struggle with his own identity, because he literally grew up in Queens with no father. He calls his family like a bunch of nobodies. And now he's like thrusted into this position where he has to remember a whole new lineage of kings and like assume their personality and strength in order to be the next ruler of a country that he just landed in. And then he has this conversation with his groomer or barber, who he's been confiding in since he got to Zamunda. And she tells him the story of Akeem when he was in Queens and how he became his own person, and tells him, be the prince from Queens. Stop trying to assume the characteristics that they're forcing on you in Zamunda, just like how you didn't assume the characteristics that were forced on you in America, and just take who you were in Queens and bring it here. Next thing we see Lavelle bring Uncle Reem to Zamunda, and Uncle Reem is basically his father figure from when he was growing up in Queens. So basically he's trying to like fuse his upbringing into his new identity by having like both father figures in Zamunda. And this brings me to my second favorite scene in this movie. Honestly, any scene with Tracy Morgan and Arsenio Hall was so funny. So you have CNN, Zamunda News Network, which is like riffing off of CNN, and you have like the typical format of like opposing views on each side and the news anchor in the middle. So you have Semi and Uncle Reem going at it over whether Lavelle is worth anyone's time. And I just think it was a very simple commentary on how polarizing views can lead to absurdity, news coverage, and violence. Anyway, so back to the story. Lavelle passes his test and he's at his prince coronation celebration party. So now that he's crowned prince, he can marry his queen and rule Zamunda. But then he realizes he doesn't want to marry this queen because she's annoying. And then he finds out that the only reason his father came to America to find him was because his country was under threat. And then he realizes that the two things that he cared about so much in Zamunda are basically lies. So his thought process is, let me go back to America because I had more opportunities there. This was the one thing I didn't understand about this movie. Like, why would you go back to Queens where you had no opportunities and then tell yourself you're gonna give your wife opportunities? Nobody in Queens knows that you cut the lion's whiskers. They're not just gonna give you a job because of everything you did in Zamunda. So you're back in the same situation that you work so hard to prove that you're better than. So anyways, it's back in Queens where Lavelle has his like character resolution moment, where Akeem tries to like stop the wedding so that he can marry the queen in Zamunda and like avoid a war with the neighboring country. But then Lavelle's like, I'm not going back to Zamunda without Mirembe. So either you take it or leave it. And Akeem is reminded of the moment where he told his parents the same thing about Lisa. And so obviously he changes his mind. He's like, okay, you can get married. So Lavelle's character is able to find his own version of black masculinity that rebukes the negative stereotypes from Queens and also the crippling characteristics of like being royalty from Zamunda, and just uses the parts that are best from both worlds and uses his own like resourcefulness and intelligence to be his own black man. So that's the masculinity theme. Now I want to talk about the feminine theme. There's 6 significant black female characters in this movie that I want to talk about because I think they all sort of take from different tropes of black women in the history of film. First, we have Lisa and Mary. And I'll get to the colorism aspect of this relationship that I found in this movie. I don't know if it was intentional, but like it just stuck out to me. But Lisa's like obviously the light-skinned Eurocentric features queen, the chosen female, and Mary was the one that was left behind, not Eurocentric features, dark skin, loud, ghetto, obnoxious. So you could not have 2 more like stereotypical but also different maternal figures. So then you have the pedal throwers and the royal bathers. They're completely objectified. They are completely submissive to the person they are taking care of. And I feel like their role was just brought into this movie because it was in the last movie. But like they're problematic in both. Just stop objectifying women for sexual pleasure. Thank you. Next would be Meeka, who is the oldest daughter in line for the throne until it's usurped by this bastard son. And her character just reeks of the strong black woman trope. She's very aloof. There's very minimal scenes of her being like caring or having like emotions other than duty to her country. So there's a couple scenes of her in her office where she's just pissed off watching the news about her half-brother becoming king because he's male, when she's been in this country her whole life, has been training to become the queen, and now can't because of these like old traditions that are in her way. So she's obviously frustrated because she's been in Zamunda her whole life and she's been training to become the queen, which was kind of weird to me because it's like, you knew the law said women couldn't rule, so why did you assume that you would rule? But she's like really bitter, and all of her scenes are her like practicing her stick fighting, which makes sense in the end, but like there's no character development outside of her being angry that she can no longer be queen. So these strong Black women tropes of women who are able to overcome all of the barriers and don't like really mention or talk about how the barriers are affecting them, they just kind of power through and eventually they do succeed. It's very prevalent in film, but it's also problematic because it's not fair to do that. You're like normalizing that behavior when you say like, oh, like don't worry about them because like they always make it through those hard times. Like, no, it sucks. What happened to her sucked. She deserved to be the queen. So there's this very interesting scene where Lavelle and Meeka are both talking about being underestimated. And you can just tell that Kenya Barris had a role in writing this scene because he's so good at like bringing these super heavy and like important conversations into dialogue in a seamless way.
Been getting that look my entire life. People write me off because the way I talk or where I'm from. But you got no idea what I'm talking about because you a princess.
Princesses can be written off just as much as anyone. I have been preparing my whole life to be standing where you are in this moment.
So it's very interesting to see how Lavelle is allowed to struggle under the conceptions that like weigh him down, but he doesn't even realize that a Black woman could also struggle under similar preconceptions. But even Meeka in the scene is unemotional about her struggles. Like she's just sitting there stone-faced looking at her half-brother like, suck it up. The other thing that pissed me off about Meeka's character arc was that she defeated General Easy with her stick fighting, and then she said like,
Perhaps now you would like to solve your problems diplomatically.
And then later in the wedding you learn that like trade routes have been reopened and the countries are at peace because of diplomatic ties. So you didn't even get to see her be diplomatic. Like she's just fighting. All she does is just like wield her stick. So I didn't like that. That was frustrating. Then you have Teyanna Taylor's character. I don't really have an issue with her in the role. I'm just confused by the role. She enters the movie in her dance scene, which is fine because like that's how they just like do introductions in Zamunda. But she's very like Jezebel-esque in this dance scene, which is very Teyanna Taylor-esque. She seems like she knows what she's doing intellectually to like seduce this prince to want to marry her for her father's benefit. And then when they're at the party for his coronation, she basically reenacts the scene that her aunt did. And like this was really confusing to me because I was like, I thought you were like cunning and sexual like Jezebel, but now you're like just like almost asexual in like your subjection to Lavelle. Your aunt in 30 years never told you like maybe we should not be like this. I'm just confused why her aunt never told her to do something different. And then we come to the groomer or Mirembe, and like the first time you see her, she's like more fully clothed than the royal bathers or the petal throwers. She's one of the Black female characters that isn't problematic because she's ambitious, she's complex, she has emotions, she's the love interest, and she's dark skinned. So she's like allowed to be more things than just like the stereotypical tropes that Black women are used to being represented as. So in one of the scenes, she actually calls Zamunda backwards when she's talking to Lavelle. And she also expresses to him her own ambitions to start a barbershop. And I think their little scene in the garden was really cute in how like you can see the chemistry between them. But ultimately, like she's not able to do anything without the help of her husband. Her character arc ends when she gets married. So like, so now I want to get into the colorism aspect that I picked up on. I'm not sure if anybody else picked up on it. I don't think it was intentional, but I just thought that it was interesting that you had a light-skinned, Eurocentric woman who was chosen queen fighting for her dark-skinned daughter, and then the left behind, loud, ghetto, dark-skinned woman and her light-skinned son. I also want to note that Lisa's character was very consistent from the first movie to the second movie. Very outspoken, speaks her mind, true to herself, all that stuff. What was weird for me was when Mary came to the palace, how Lisa reacted to her, because in the original movie, Lisa was so down to go into Akeem's poor apartment building. Like, she just kept begging him to go to his building. But then when someone from her borough, from Queens, comes to her palace, she doesn't know how to act. She's literally put off by their behavior, as if she's never seen their behavior before, even though she's from where they're from. I don't know, I guess living 30 years as a queen will change you. The reason I think I'm reading a little too much into the colorism aspect was because she made it very clear that she's upset that Akeem would go to America to find his son when he had a perfectly good, groomed for royalty daughter here. But then there was also this scene that made me realize that maybe I'm not reading too much into this.
Who told you you could go through my closet?
Well, I was just thinking, since we're related, maybe that we could share a couple of... Why your mama so uppity?
What is uppity?
I am not uppity.
So uppity is racist. Like, Southerners would use it as like uppity racial slur to like talk about a black person who didn't know their place. So using it in this context was a little confusing because like she knows her place, she's the queen, she's literally in her place on the throne. But I also feel like it was Mary's way of like checking her superiority complex. Like, they're both from Queens, act right. But they eventually get along once Lavelle passes all of his tests and becomes the prince. Like, they're drunk and drinking at the party, so it was a quick resolution. So lastly, I want to talk about the theme of royalty. So there wasn't a lot of emphasis on like the public opinion of the royal family that you see in The Crown. Akeem and his father and his family are very like insular in that sense, where they're mostly concerned about their own internal conflict and they don't really like talk about how the population will view them. I feel like they made this plot decision because Akeem was dealing with a lot. Like, the first movie, Akeem was not really concerned with being royal. He was just concerned about finding his love interest. But in this movie, he's like struggling with like protecting Zamunda, finding an heir, the heir not working out as he thought it would, and then also dealing with his family who like thought they had a path and now that path has been destroyed. So he interestingly retreats back to Zamunda traditions, even though he was obviously very anti-tradition when he went to America the first time. And then as each character goes through their own character arc, they're like externally affecting his internal character arc of like deciding to become a different king than his father. But it was really mostly his son Lavelle's character arc of basically doing exactly what he did that reminded him that he told himself he was going to be different. He promised Lisa he would be different. And so being different means rebuking the tradition of only having a male heir and letting his daughter, who's been groomed for this position her whole life, to assume the throne. And it just so happens, luckily, that she's a strong black woman trope. So she powered through her father basically disregarding her to fight off the general herself. And now the whole country's safe.
Do I have your attention?
So that's coming to America. A lot of stars in this movie. Little appearance by Rick Ross himself. I feel like as far as sequels go, it wasn't terrible. I mean, I didn't find the first movie to be that hilarious. I actually felt like the second movie actually had funny scenes in it. And I feel like the characters that they were working with from the 80s, like, they're just who they are today. Like, it makes sense. But it was also problematic for all of the reasons that I stated. I don't know, I'm just tired of watching black movies that could just do a better job representing black people. Maybe it's just not profitable, so. But let me know in the comment section what you guys thought of coming to America. Did you pick up on the things that I picked up on? Did I miss something that you guys thought was interesting? If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, but don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.